The morning of May 7th, 2025, started like any other in Rome. The sky was quiet. The ancient stones of St. Peter's Basilica glowed in the soft light of dawn. Pilgrims filled the square, their hearts calm but hopeful. But none of them knew what was coming. Within hours, history would be made, not just for the Catholic Church, but for the entire world. At the top of the Sistine Chapel, everyone's eyes were fixed on a single chimney. That old chimney had signaled joy or disappointment many times before, and suddenly, just after morning prayer, it happened. A plume of white smoke began to rise. Gasps filled the square. White smoke meant one thing: Habemus Papam. We have a pope. The bells of St. Peter's rang loudly, echoing through the eternal city. The cheers grew louder. The centuries-old tradition had reached its climax. Inside those ancient Vatican walls, the Cardinals had chosen a new leader. The world was about to meet him. And then the name was revealed: Luis Antonio Tagle, now to be known as Pope Luis I, the 267th Pope, and the very first from the Philippines. Yes, a Filipino. A humble man, once a boy walking through the streets of Manila, now standing at the center of the Catholic world. A man of faith, of deep humility, of hope. A man who never forgot the poor, the forgotten, the marginalized. A man who rose not through ambition, but through service. And now, the people of the world were watching him step out onto the balcony for the first time as the new shepherd of 1.4 billion Catholics. The reaction: unforgettable. The crowd in St. Peter's Square exploded. Cheers erupted in dozens of languages. People wept, clapped, knelt, and prayed. The energy was electric. From Italy to Brazil, from Uganda to Canada, from Australia to South Korea, the news spread like fire. But nowhere did it hit harder nor shine brighter than in the Philippines. Back home in Manila, a spiritual earthquake shook the streets. The people, glued to radios, phones, and TV screens, cried out in disbelief and joy. Quiapo Church overflowed with people who had spent the night in prayer. When they heard the news, the silence broke into dancing. Drums beat, fireworks exploded. Confetti rained from rooftops. People hugged strangers. Old women knelt in tears. Children waved Vatican flags next to Filipino ones. It wasn't just celebration, it was soul-deep pride. The people had always seen Cardinal Tagle as their own. Now he was the world's. He had never chased this moment. He didn't crave power or fame. Instead, he lived a life of service, working in the poorest neighborhoods, comforting those in need, speaking gently but firmly for justice. He was a priest who remembered people's names, a bishop who never forgot where he came from, a cardinal who walked among the people and never looked down on them. Now, as Pope Louis I, he brought that same spirit into the Vatican. He stood there on the balcony, looking out at the crowd below. He didn't say much, but his smile, soft and warm, told the world what kind of pope he would be. Not a ruler above the people, but a shepherd among them. This was a new era, one shaped not by power but by compassion, not by politics but by faith, a papacy rooted in service, dialogue, and healing. All across the world, people felt it. In Latin America, crowds danced in church courtyards. In Africa, choirs sang praise under open skies. In Europe, church bells rang with urgency and joy. In the United States, major news networks paused regular programming to show live coverage of the announcement. Social media lit up with hashtags like Do Pope Luis and New Era for the Church. The world didn't just see a new pope. They saw a new possibility. A bridge between East and West, a man who could unite continents, a leader who knew what it meant to struggle and how to lift others up from it. Pope Louis I, many said, would not just be a spiritual head. He would be a global voice of hope. But how did this man from Manila arrive here? Luis Antonio Tagle was born in a modest neighborhood in the Philippines. Life wasn't easy, but faith was strong. His parents taught him to pray, to care, to serve. From a young age, he found peace in the church. The gospel lit a fire in him, a deep desire to love and lead. As he grew, so did his calling. He entered the seminary and was ordained a priest. But he didn't stay hidden behind church walls. He walked into slums. He sat with addicts. He fed the hungry. He listened to mothers with broken hearts and children with empty stomachs. He became known as the shepherd of the poor. Even as he rose through the ranks of the church, first bishop, then cardinal, he never changed. He never wore the weight of power. His sermons stayed simple. His heart remained open. He answered emails himself. He ate with janitors and spoke softly to children. And when he met the sick, he held their hands, sometimes longer than anyone else had in weeks. That's who the Cardinals saw, that's who they chose. The conclave, held in the Sistine Chapel, is one of the most secretive and sacred events in the world. There are no interviews, no speeches, just prayer, silence, and sacred votes. And when the time came, the votes pointed to one name, Luis Antonio Tagle, not because he was loud, but because he was faithful, not because he demanded attention, but because his life demanded respect. Now, as Pope Louis I, he carries more than a new title. He carries the dreams of a church that wants healing, a church that wants to serve, a church that wants to remember its roots and reach for new heights. His vision is clear. One flock, one shepherd. A church that embraces diversity, values, dialogue, and never forgets its mission, to love. In his first message, he didn't promise grand reforms or dramatic gestures. Instead, he spoke of listening, of walking together, of helping the wounded and comforting the afraid. He asked people to pray for him, not just praise him, and that simple request moved the world. Because it wasn't rehearsed, it was real. This Pope is not here to build walls. He is here to build bridges, between the rich and poor, between nations, between faiths, between past and future. In a world torn by war, fear, and division, Pope Louis XV shines as a humble reminder. Love is still possible. Unity is still within reach. Compassion still matters. The choice of a Filipino Pope reminds us all, greatness does not come from where you are born, but how you live. In Luis's journey from the alleys of Manila to the balcony of St. Peter's, we see a story that belongs to all of us, a story of resilience, service, and unshakable hope. So as the sun set on May 7th, casting golden light across Rome, one thing was clear. The Catholic Church had turned a page. A new chapter had begun. And at the center of it stood a man whose only weapon was love, whose only power was humility. The bells rang again that evening, not just in Rome, but in every corner of the world where someone believed in second chances, in healing, in unity. Pope Louis I had arrived, and with him, a quiet revolution had begun.